My name is Serena Voss. I'm 32 years old, and until 14 months ago, I was a cybersecurity analyst for a mid-sized financial firm in Hartwell, Pennsylvania. I spent my days finding the thing that did not belong, the access request filed 2 minutes before a breach, the user credential active after a termination date, the single transaction in a ledger of thousands that sat at the wrong angle to everything around it. I was good at it. I had a particular patience for the long search, the kind that required you to hold your findings quietly and wait for the moment that made them mean something. I did not expect to need that patience inside my own marriage. The morning I found the envelope, I was 7 months pregnant and moving slowly through everything, slowly through the kitchen, slowly through the hallway, slowly through the particular arithmetic of a body that had reorganized itself around another person. The envelope was on the kitchen counter when I came downstairs, beside the stack of mail my husband Caleb had brought in the night before and left sorted by size, the way he always sorted it. The return address read Wren and Aldrich, attorneys at law. Below that, a Hartwell address I recognized, the same building where Caleb's father, Edmund Voss, had kept his business accounts for 30 years before his death. I set my coffee down next to it, and I looked at it for a long moment. Edmund had mentioned Wren and Aldrich to me once, 8 months before he died, in the particular offhand way he mentioned things he wanted logged rather than discussed. He had said, "Serena, there's a document at the firm with your name in it. When the time comes, they'll reach out." He had said it the way a person says a thing they have already handled and simply need witnessed. I had nodded and filed it in the place I kept things that required patience. I did not open the envelope. I picked it up, registered its weight, substantial, more than a single page, and placed it in the fireproof document box I kept on the top shelf of our bedroom closet, beside our marriage certificate and the deed to the house and the folder of records I had assembled over the 3 years I had been part of the Voss family. I knew what it contained in the broad sense. I did not need to open it to know it mattered. What I did not know, standing in that kitchen with my coffee going cold and one hand resting on the curve of my stomach, was that 3 days later Delia Voss would call a family meeting I was not invited to, and that the family meeting would produce a decision about my baby shower, and that the decision would make the envelope matter in ways I had not yet had occasion to calculate. Welcome back to channel, where ordinary women face impossible family moments and answer with a steady voice instead of a raised one. If you've ever been told you don't belong in a room that was built around you, this one is for you. Leave a comment below and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Now, back to Serena. The baby shower had been Caleb's idea first, which I mentioned not to assign credit, but because the sequence of it mattered later. He had brought it up in the second trimester, on an evening when we were sitting in the nursery we had been slowly assembling, a room that had been a home office and was now something else entirely, still smelling faintly of the fresh paint we had chosen together, a soft sage green that took 3 samples before we arrived at the right one. He had said he wanted the baby to arrive into a room full of the people who loved her, and I had said that sounded right, and we had agreed that a shower was the thing. I was the one who did the work. That was not a complaint. I was an organized person by nature and by training, and organizing things gave me a particular satisfaction, the kind that came from seeing a plan take its correct shape, the way a floor plan makes sense only once you are standing inside the room it describes. I found the venue, a restored farmhouse event space in Carver County that had exposed beams and wide plank floors and light that came through the south-facing windows in a way that made everything inside it look considered. I called on a Tuesday morning at 9 before the inbox filled up, the way I had learned to do things. I paid the deposit that afternoon, $600, charged to my own card, because the booking required immediate confirmation and Caleb was in a site meeting, and it had not seemed worth waiting. I ordered the florals on Thursday. Cream garden roses and trailing eucalyptus, which I had seen in a photograph and which seemed, to me, like the right combination. Understated and alive at the same time. I confirmed the caterer on Friday. I built the guest list in a shared document on Saturday morning, seated at the kitchen table with my second cup of tea and the particular focused quiet of a weekend task. I was doing well. Delia's name was at the top of the list. I had put it there myself. Delia Voss was a small woman who occupied large amounts of space through methods that had nothing to do with volume. She was 61, silver-haired, with a precision to her appearance that I had come to understand was not vanity, but armor. Every element of her presentation was chosen, maintained, and deployed. She spoke in the measured tones of a woman who had decided long ago that the people around her would come to her register, and they generally did. She had been cordial to me in the first year of my relationship with Caleb. I had understood the cordiality as provisional, the way a lease is cordial. It gave you occupancy without conferring ownership. When Caleb and I married, the cordiality adjusted itself by a few degrees in the direction of warmth without ever fully arriving there. When I became pregnant, something in the arrangement shifted in a way I could not immediately name. What I noticed first was the cadence of her calls to Caleb, which increased. What I noticed second was that the calls happened more often when I was in another room, and that Caleb came out of them with the particular quietness of a man who had been given a task he had not yet decided how to present. I was a fraud analyst. I noticed patterns before I had language for them. The call that changed things came on a Monday evening, 3 days after the envelope arrived. I was in the kitchen assembling dinner, a slow task at 7 months, everything requiring more negotiation with my own body than it once had, when Caleb's phone lit up on the counter with his mother's name. He took it into the living room. I heard the low register of his voice through the wall, but not the words, which I did not try to capture. 15 minutes later, he came back into the kitchen and stood at the counter with his hands in his pockets, and his weight shifted back the way it shifted when he had something to say that he had not finished deciding to say. I said, "What did she want?" He said, "She called a family meeting last Sunday. I didn't know about it until tonight." I set down the wooden spoon I had been holding. The sauce on the stove made a slow, even sound. A family meeting about what? He looked at the counter rather than at me. The shower. I waited. She thinks she and Aunt Cornelia and Patricia, they think the planning has gotten away from what the family envisioned for the event. He paused, and I heard him choose his next words with the care of a man walking across a floor he was not certain would hold. They've decided they want to take over the coordination, and they want to restructure the guest list. I said, restructure. Streamline. That was the word she used. I looked at the stove. The sauce was at a low simmer, and the kitchen smelled of garlic and thyme, and the particular warmth of a weeknight dinner I had been making for 20 minutes while this was being decided somewhere else. "And my name," I said, "is my name on the restructured invitation." Caleb's jaw moved. She said it would be better if it came from the family side, that it would read as more cohesive if it came from them. I did not answer. The sauce made its slow sound. The kitchen was warm, and the window above the sink had gone dark with the evening outside it, and I stood very still with both hands at my sides and felt the pressure behind my sternum that was not quite pain, and not quite anything I had a word for. Something in me had gathered the way clouds gather before weather. Not yet breaking, not yet anything the sky would act on, but present and building and absolutely certain of itself. "She said she'd call you," Caleb said. "I know she will," I said. I turned back to the stove and finished making dinner, and we ate it largely in silence, and I did not say what I was thinking, because what I was thinking required more time before it was ready to be said. Delia called the following morning at 9:30. I was at the kitchen table with my laptop, working a half-day remotely. I had reduced my hours in the 3rd trimester, a negotiated arrangement I had documented carefully with HR. My coffee was beside me, and the morning light was coming through the east window at the flat angle of late February, which gave everything in the kitchen a particular pale clarity. I answered on the second ring. "Serena," she said. The warmth in her voice was present and calibrated, the way a thermostat maintains a temperature rather than produces heat. "I've been meaning to call. I hope you're resting." "I'm well," I said. "Thank you." "Good. Good." A small pause, the kind that preceded the real beginning of the call, while the opening was still being wrapped up. "I wanted to speak with you directly about the shower. I think there's been some miscommunication, and I don't want there to be any confusion between us." "Of course," I said. "The family has been talking, and I feel that the event has grown in a direction that isn't quite right for what we had in mind. The venue, the scale of it. The Voss family has a particular way of doing these things, and we want the baby's arrival to be welcomed in a way that reflects that." She paused again. "I hope you understand that this comes from love. For the baby. For Caleb. I noticed she did not include me in that list. I've put a great deal of work into the planning, I said. My voice was even. I held it even the way you hold a door against a wind that is pushing back. And we so appreciate that, Delia said. We really do. But the family would like to take it from here. We think it's better if the shower comes from us. It's more traditional. And it will be less burden on you, which at this stage is only right. I said nothing. The silence on the line lasted 4 seconds. I counted them. Serena? I heard you, I said. I'm glad. I think this will be for the best. I'll have Patricia reach out about the venue. I'm sure the deposit can be returned. The venue requires 60 days notice for cancellation, I said. We are inside that window. The deposit is non-refundable. A brief pause. Well, that's something we can sort out. The florals are also confirmed, I said, with a non-refundable retainer. I see. Her tone had not changed its temperature, but the quality of it had shifted in the way still water shifts when something passes through it beneath the surface. These are details we can manage. The important thing is that we're aligned on the vision. I understand your position, I said. I ended the call 2 minutes later. After she had said several more things I had listened to without response, and I set the phone flat on the table, and I sat with my hands folded over my laptop and looked at the pale February light on the kitchen wall and breathed through the pressure that had built across my ribcage until it moved through and settled somewhere lower and quieter. I thought about the envelope in the document box upstairs. I did not go and get it. I did not need to. Edmund had said, when the time comes, they'll reach out. I had understood him. I had always understood him. I went back to work. I want to tell you what the 3 years of being a Voss had actually cost, because cost is not always a number, though sometimes it is, and in this case it was both. The house that Caleb and I lived in had been purchased 22 months before the shower, at the edge of what our combined finances could responsibly reach. We had both contributed to the down payment. I had come in with 60% of it, which was the proportion that reflected what I had saved over 9 years of working in a field that compensated precision, and what I had understood was that the house was ours, which meant the contribution was invisible in the way that equitable contributions tend to be. Nobody recorded it anywhere that mattered. It was simply the number that made the purchase possible, and then it was the past. What I had in savings at the time of the shower, after the down payment and the nursery renovation and the reduced hours and the $600 venue deposit and the floral retainer, was $14,200, a number I knew precisely because I maintained a spreadsheet and I looked at it every first of the month the way my father had looked at the oil gauge on his truck, not with worry, but with the quiet attentiveness of someone responsible for keeping a thing running. The nursery renovation had cost us $4,800, of which I had covered $3,100 from the account I maintained separately for house expenses, because the joint account had been lower than expected that month, and I had not wanted the project to stall. We had been converting the room for 6 weeks at that point, and the sage green paint was on the walls, and I had wanted it finished. I transferred the money on a Thursday afternoon and did not mention the amount to Caleb until the following week, when I included it in the household summary I compiled monthly in the shared spreadsheet we both had access to and that Caleb opened approximately once a quarter. He had said, "You covered the rest of the nursery?" I said, "The joint was light. It made sense." He said, "I'll transfer it back." He did not transfer it back, which I also did not mention, and which I noted in the spreadsheet in a column I had labeled pending reimbursement, and which contained several other entries in the same patient, unaccusing font. That was the second sacrifice line. The first was earlier, the winter before the pregnancy, when Delia had mentioned that the Voss family Christmas gathering had always been held at the Hartwell Inn and that the cost for the private dining room was something the family split annually. And I had said of course and written a check for $740 because Caleb had not brought his checkbook and the moment had required someone to act, and I was the one who acted in moments like those. The check had cleared on December 23rd. The reimbursement had not arrived. I had not asked for it. I was not keeping score. I was keeping records, which is a different thing, and the difference would matter eventually. The week after Delia's call, Patricia, Delia's younger sister, a woman I had always experienced as a weather system that followed Delia's fronts, texted me a photograph of an invitation. The invitation was cream cardstock with a script font. It listed the shower date, the time, the venue, not the farmhouse I had booked, a different one, smaller, closer to the Voss family neighborhood. It listed the hosts, Delia Voss, Patricia Hale, and Cornelia Marsh. My name was not on it. Not as host. Not as guest of honor. Not anywhere. I looked at the photograph for a long time. The February light had shifted by that hour to the late afternoon kind, low and slanted, and it came through the bedroom window at an angle that fell across my hands where I held the phone, and I noticed my hands, very still, the way they went still when I was processing something that required the whole of my attention. I set the phone on the nightstand. I went to the closet, and I looked at the fireproof box on the top shelf. I did not take it down. I rested my hand on the lid for a moment. Cool metal, solid corners, the specific weight of a container that holds things that do not expire, and then I stepped back and closed the closet door. Edmund had given me the information I needed the day, he said, when the time comes. I had stored it the way I stored everything that mattered, carefully in a place I could find it, without touching it until the moment required. The moment had not yet required it, but it was close enough now that I could feel it, not in any dramatic way, not in the way of scenes in films where the music shifts and the protagonist raises her chin. In a quiet way. In the way a calculation completes itself before the person running it has finished writing it down. I went downstairs and made dinner. I sat at the table and ate it. Outside the window, the February dark came in the way it always did at that hour. Early and complete, no gradation, just the moment when the light was there, and then the moment when it was not. I was in no hurry. Caleb tried first. He came into the kitchen on a Saturday morning, the last Saturday of February, which arrived gray and without wind, the sky the particular flat white of a day that had decided not to commit to anything, and he set 2 mugs of coffee on the table and sat across from me and looked at the mugs rather than at me, which was how I knew the conversation had been prepared. I waited. My mother called again, he said. I know, I said. I had heard his phone at 7:15 and had lain in bed listening to the particular quietness of his side of the conversation, which told me more than the words would have. She wants to meet. The 3 of us. She says she wants to clear the air. He looked up from the mugs. His expression was the one he wore when he had been asked to carry something between 2 people and had not yet decided whether the carrying was fair. I think it might help. I wrapped both hands around my mug. The ceramic was warm and the weight of it was grounding, and I focused on that for a moment, the specific temperature, the particular heft. What would clearing the air accomplish? I said. It was not quite a question. She feels like there's been a misunderstanding about her intentions. She removed my name from my own shower invitation, I said. I understood her intentions clearly. Caleb's jaw moved. I know. And I told her I said that was too far. He paused. She says she was trying to protect the event from becoming contentious. That she was thinking of the baby. I said nothing. The coffee steamed between us. Outside the kitchen window, a single bird moved across the white sky and was gone. She's not a bad person, Serena, Caleb said. She just has a specific way of. I know what she is, I said. I've been watching her specific way for 3 years. He looked at his mug. Something in his posture had the quality of a man who had come to advocate for a position and found, upon arriving, that the position was harder to defend in person than it had been in preparation. Will you come to the meeting? He said. I looked at him across the table. He was a good man in the ways that mattered and a limited one in the ways that also mattered, and I had made my peace with that arithmetic long before this morning, and I made it again now, quickly and without drama. Yes, I said. I'll come. The meeting was at Delia's house, on a Tuesday evening 4 days later. Delia's house was a colonial on Ashford Lane that she had lived in for 31 years. Edmund's house originally, then theirs, then hers after his death 2 years ago. It was maintained with the same precision she brought to everything, the front path edged, the winter pots flanking the door replanted with something evergreen and structural, the interior smelling of the particular candle she had burned in the front rooms for as long as I had been coming here, cedar, and something I had never been able to name exactly. Caleb's Aunt Cornelia was already there when we arrived. I had not been told Cornelia would be present, which I registered and did not comment on. Cornelia was Delia's older sister and occupied in the family structure the role of institutional memory. She had been present at every Voss event for 3 decades and had opinions about all of them. She was 70, wide-shouldered, and wore the expression of someone who had concluded long ago that most difficulties were the result of insufficient deference to the correct people. We sat in Delia's living room, which had 2 sofas facing each other across a glass-topped coffee table. Delia had arranged the seating so that Caleb and I occupied one sofa, and she and Cornelia occupied the other, which put the 2 of them on the same side in a way that was probably not accidental. Tea had been laid out. I did not take any. Delia began by saying that she wanted this to be a conversation between family members who loved each other and that she hoped we could all approach it in that spirit. I said, "Of course." "I know the invitation came as a surprise," she said, "and I understand why it was hurtful. That was not my intention." I waited. My intention was to give this event the shape it deserved. The Voss family has welcomed every new child in a particular way for 30 years, and I wanted this baby's arrival to carry that same meaning. She paused, and her hands were folded in her lap, and her voice was warm and reasonable and entirely self-justifying. I should have communicated better. I can see that now. But the heart of it was love, Serena. For the baby. For this family. Cornelia nodded at the word family the way people nod at hymns. Not because the words are new, but because they are familiar, and the familiarity is the point. I said nothing. Delia waited a beat for me to fill the silence, and when I didn't, she continued. "I thought we could find a way to incorporate your planning into what we've put together. Use some of what you've chosen, adapt the rest. Make it a collaborative thing." "She paid a non-refundable deposit on the original venue," Caleb said. He said it carefully, the way he said things he had decided he needed to say. Delia's gaze moved to him briefly. "And we feel terrible about that. Don't we, Cornelia?" "Terrible," Cornelia said, in the tone of someone who had decided to mean the word without allowing it to cost anything. "We'd like to make it right," Delia said. "Whatever that looks like." I looked at her across the glass-topped table with its careful arrangement of tea things, and I thought about the word collaborative and what it had actually meant in the sequence of events. She had held a meeting without me, made a decision without me, produced an invitation without my name, and was now offering to incorporate what remained of my planning into the structure she had already built. Collaboration, in Delia's usage, meant permission to participate in something she owned. "I appreciate you saying so," I said. Delia's shoulders eased slightly, the way they did when she believed a situation had resolved. "I'd like to think about it," I said, "before I agree to anything." The shoulders resettled. "Of course. Take the time you need." Cornelia said, "Family doesn't keep score, Serena. That's the thing to remember. We move forward together." I kept my face still. The candle on the side table made no sound, and the room was very quiet, and I let the quiet be what it was, which was a container for everything I was not yet saying, and it held everything I put in it without complaint. Patricia texted the following Thursday. Patricia's texts arrived in a particular style, short, warm on the surface, carrying a structure underneath that was always a version of the same thing, what Delia wanted, translated into the register of a younger woman trying to seem less formal than the source material. This one said, "Hey, just wanted to check in and see if you'd had a chance to think about the shower stuff. We're on a bit of a timeline with the new venue and would love to get you looped in, smiling face." The smiley face at the end was load-bearing. It was doing the work of making the timeline feel like an invitation rather than a deadline. I was at my desk when the text arrived, running a remote monitoring report that required most of my attention. I set the phone face down and finished the report, and then I picked it up and typed, "Still thinking. I'll be in touch soon." I read it once, decided it was accurate, and sent it. Then I sat for a moment and looked at the wall above my monitor, which had a single framed print on it, a topographic map of the Appalachian Ridge, a wedding gift from my own sister, who knew that I found something clarifying about the visual representation of terrain. I had always liked maps. I liked knowing where the high ground was. I thought about Wren and Aldrich. I thought about Edmund's voice, low, deliberate, the voice of a man who had built several things over a long life and had learned not to say more than was necessary. When the time comes, they'll reach out. He had said it as though the timing were already arranged, which I understood now it probably had been. The envelope had arrived. Wren and Aldrich had reached out, on their own timeline, at the moment Edmund had arranged for them to do so. I had not called the firm yet. I had been waiting to understand what I was calling about, and I was beginning to understand it now. I picked up my phone and looked up the firm's number and saved it in my contacts under W&A and set the phone back down. Not yet, but close. Caleb's cousin Marcus called on a Sunday. Marcus was 38, an attorney who practiced civil litigation in Philadelphia, and he occupied in the Voss family the role of the person called upon to smooth things that had developed sharp edges. I had always liked Marcus. He was direct in the way that people who work with language professionally sometimes are. He said what he meant, and he said it without the decorative wrapping that Delia favored. He called while Caleb was out, which I did not think was accidental. "Serena," he said. "How are you holding up?" "I'm well," I said. "Thank you for calling. I heard about the shower situation." He paused. "I want to be honest with you. I think my aunt handled it badly." I said, "I appreciate that. She's not a malicious person. You know that. But she has a way of deciding what the right outcome is, and then engineering toward it, and she doesn't always account for the people she moves around in the process." Another pause. "I'm not calling to defend her. I'm calling because I think you're owed an actual apology, and I don't think you're going to get one that means anything unless someone in the family acknowledges the full scope of it." I said, "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that if you wanted to push back, on the invitation, on the venue, on the deposits, you'd have standing. Family law isn't my area, but basic contract and contribution arguments aren't complicated." He said it matter-of-factly, without drama. "I also think if you made clear to Delia that you understood your standing, some of this would resolve faster than it's currently resolving." I was at the kitchen table. My tea was in front of me. The Sunday afternoon light was the low winter kind, already declining at 3 o'clock, giving the kitchen the amber quality of a room that had decided it was closer to evening than afternoon. "Marcus," I said, "do you know anything about Edmund's arrangements with Wren and Aldrich?" A pause. A different quality of pause than the previous ones. "Why do you ask?" "He mentioned them to me once," I said. "Before he died. He said there was a document with my name in it." The line was quiet for 3 seconds. "I don't know the specifics," Marcus said. "But I know Edmund was thorough. He was the most thorough man I've ever known." He paused again. "If he told you there was a document, there's a document." "I know," I said. "You should call them," he said. "Sooner rather than later." After the call, I sat with my hands flat on the table and felt the particular quality of a conversation that had confirmed something without stating it, the way a test result confirms a diagnosis you had already made from the symptoms. I picked up my phone. I called Wren and Aldrich on Monday morning at 8:55, before the hour turned and the day's business fully opened. The phone rang twice, and a woman answered with the firm's name. I said my name was Serena Voss and that I had received a piece of correspondence from the firm, and I was calling to understand the next steps. There was a brief pause on her end, the pause of someone checking a screen, and then she said, "Mrs. Voss, we've been expecting your call. Mr. Aldrich would like to schedule a meeting at your earliest convenience." I said I could come Wednesday. She said Wednesday at 10 was available. I said that worked. When I ended the call, I set the phone on the table and looked at the morning light coming through the east window. The February light had shifted slightly toward March now, arriving at a slightly higher angle, carrying a degree or two more warmth than it had the week before. Small changes. The kind that accumulate into a season. I went upstairs to the bedroom closet and looked at the fireproof box on the top shelf. I did not open it. I rested 2 fingers on the lid, briefly. The way you confirm a thing is where you left it without needing to inspect it, a check by touch rather than by sight. The metal was cool, and the box was solid, and the envelope was inside it, and I knew what it contained, and I did not need to read it to know. I took my fingers off the lid and closed the closet and went downstairs to make breakfast. Wednesday was 2 days away. The offices of Wren and Aldrich were on the 4th floor of a building on Clement Street, the kind of building that announced its age through its materials rather than its condition. Marble floors worn to a particular smoothness by decades of foot traffic, dark wood paneling in the elevator, brass fixtures polished to the point of looking intentional rather than vintage. I arrived 7 minutes early and sat in the waiting area on a chair that was more comfortable than it appeared, which I took as a reasonable sign. Mr. Aldrich came out to meet me himself. He was in his late 60s, compact and precise, with the unhurried manner of a man who had learned that deliberateness was its own form of authority. He shook my hand and said he was glad I had called, and the way he said it, not relieved, not urgent, simply glad, the word carrying the weight of something long arranged arriving on schedule, told me that Edmund had prepared this meeting down to its tone. He led me back to a corner office with 2 windows overlooking Clement Street. We sat across a desk from each other, and he opened a folder and looked at it briefly before looking at me. He said, "Your father-in-law engaged us in the matter of the Voss family trust approximately 3 years ago, following his diagnosis. He was extremely precise about his intentions and extremely precise about his timeline." I said, "He was a precise man." "He was." Mr. Aldrich allowed a small pause, which felt like a form of respect. "I want to walk you through the structure of the trust before we discuss the specific instrument he asked us to prepare. Some of what I'm about to describe may be familiar to you, and some of it may be new. I'd ask you to hold your questions until the end, because the sequence in which I present it matters." I said, "Of course." He talked for 22 minutes. I listened with the attention I brought to the long search at work, not reaching for conclusions, not assembling the narrative before it had finished arriving, simply receiving each piece of information and placing it accurately in relation to the pieces before and after it. I had a notepad. I did not use it. I had always been better at holding information in memory than in notes, and this was information I intended to hold very carefully. When he finished, he looked at me and said, "Do you have questions?" I said, "1. When does this need to be acted on?" He looked at the folder. "The instrument Edmund prepared has a trigger condition." He was specific about what constituted the trigger. He looked back at me. "Based on what you've described to me, the family meeting, the invitation, the communication from his wife, it is my professional assessment that the trigger condition has been met." I said, "What happens next?" "You review the document, confirm your understanding, and sign the acknowledgement form. After that, we schedule a formal notification meeting." Edmund specified who should be present. He named the people who should be present at the notification meeting. Delia Voss was the first name on the list. I sat in the chair across from Mr. Aldrich's desk, and I felt something shift in my chest, not dramatically, not in the way of scenes, but in the way of a long-held breath that has finally been permitted to release in increments, slowly, the body doing it quietly, so as not to disturb anything around it. "When can we schedule it?" I said. He checked his calendar. He named a date, 2 weeks out. I said that worked. He slid the acknowledgement form across the desk, and I read it in full before I signed it, the way my father had always said to read things before signing. Not because you expect a problem, but because the reading is how you demonstrate to yourself that you understand what you are entering. I signed it in the lower right corner and dated it and passed it back. Mr. Aldrich took it and placed it in the folder with the care of a man returning a thing to its correct position. He said, "Edmund left a note for you, to be given at this meeting once you'd signed." He passed me an envelope. It was not the envelope from the fireproof box. It was smaller, a personal envelope, cream-colored, with my first name written on the front in Edmund's handwriting, which was the handwriting of a man who had learned to write in an era when handwriting was considered a reflection of character and had never unlearned that standard. I held it. "You can read it here or at home," Mr. Aldrich said. "It's personal correspondence. It's not part of the legal record." I set it in my bag, without opening it. Some things needed to be opened in private, and some things needed to be opened in front of the people they were meant for, and I was becoming very good at knowing the difference. The 2 weeks that followed were the kind that required a particular internal management. The shower Delia had organized was scheduled for the first Saturday in March, which was 11 days from the notification meeting Mr. Aldrich had scheduled. The invitations had gone out. I knew this because my own mother had received one, forwarded a photograph of it with a text that said, "Only Serena?" with a question mark, which communicated everything it needed to. I called my mother that evening. She was a measured woman, my mother, a retired pharmacist who had spent 40 years measuring things precisely and had applied that habit to everything, including conversation. She said, "Walk me through what happened." I walked her through it. She listened without interrupting, which was her way, and when I finished she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "And you're handling it." It was not a question. "I'm handling it," I said. "Do you need anything from me?" "Not yet," I said. "Soon," she said. "I'll wait to hear from you." And then, after a brief pause, "Your father-in-law was a good man." "He was," I said. "Good men make arrangements," she said. "The arrangements hold." I said, "I know they do." After the call, I sat in the nursery for a while, in the glider we had ordered in January and assembled together on a Sunday afternoon, Caleb reading the instructions aloud while I matched parts to diagrams with the patience of someone who found assembly logical rather than frustrating. The sage green walls held the evening light in a way that made the room feel settled, completed, already what it was going to be. I sat in the glider and put one hand on my stomach and thought about Edmund, about the summer afternoon 2 years ago when he had walked me through the garden behind this house and said almost nothing for 40 minutes and then, at the gate, turned and said, "You're going to be all right here, Serena. I've made sure of it." I had not asked what he meant. I had understood that the meaning would arrive when it was ready. It was almost ready now. I could feel the shape of what was coming the way you feel a room's dimensions in the dark, not by seeing it but by moving through it carefully, registering where the walls were, understanding the space from the inside. 11 days. I rocked the glider once, slowly, and felt the good solid movement of it, and the room held its quiet around me, and I was, underneath everything, completely calm. The notification meeting was scheduled for a Thursday at 2 in the afternoon. I arrived at Wren and Aldrich 12 minutes early. I had the fireproof document box with me, not the whole box, which I had left at home, but the envelope from inside it, which I had placed that morning in the flat interior pocket of my bag, in the same careful way I had carried the accordion folder on clinic days, on the days when what I carried mattered and I needed to know it was there without having to check. I had not opened it. I had carried it for 6 weeks without opening it, and I was not going to open it in the elevator or in the waiting area or at any point before Mr. Aldrich opened his own copy in the room where it was meant to be opened, in front of the person it was meant to reach. The waiting area had the same marble floor, the same brass fixtures. I sat in the same chair as before. I set my bag on my lap and kept one hand resting on it and looked at the framed print on the wall opposite, a botanical illustration, precise and calm, the kind of image chosen for a waiting room because it required nothing from the person looking at it. Caleb arrived at 5 to 2. He came in from the cold with his coat collar up and his face, carrying the expression he had been wearing for 2 weeks, the expression of a man moving through a situation he had not fully mapped, trying to stay oriented by compass rather than landmarks. He sat in the chair beside me and looked at my bag and then at my face. "Are you ready?" he said. "Yes," I said. He put his hand over mine on top of the bag. His hand was cold from outside, and I felt the temperature of it, and I did not move my hand. Delia arrived at 2 exactly. She came through the door in her good coat, the charcoal one she wore to occasions she had decided required marking, with Cornelia behind her, which I had half expected. She stopped when she saw me, and something moved across her face in the space of a half-second, a recalibration so brief that a person not watching for it would have missed it entirely. Then the warmth closed back over it the way a surface closes over a disturbance in water, and she said, "Serena, I didn't realize you'd be here." "Mr. Aldrich asked me to come," I said. She looked at Caleb. He looked at the floor in the particular way of a man who had been told more than he had shared. The receptionist appeared and said Mr. Aldrich was ready, and we followed her down the corridor. The conference room was different from Mr. Aldrich's office, longer, with a rectangular table and chairs on both sides and a window at the far end that looked out over the street 4 floors below. Mr. Aldrich was already seated at the head of the table. A second attorney I had not met, younger, with a notepad open in front of her, sat to his left. We arranged ourselves around the table. Delia sat across from me. Cornelia sat beside her. Caleb sat beside me. The seating had an accidental symmetry that was probably not accidental, the table a border between two versions of the same family. Mr. Aldrich said good afternoon and thanked everyone for coming and said he wanted to begin by explaining the nature of the meeting, which was to provide formal notification of an instrument within the Voss family trust, executed by Edmund Voss, which had reached its trigger condition and was now operative. Delia said, "I was under the impression this was a general estate matter." Mr. Aldrich said, "The trust is an estate matter, yes. This meeting concerns a specific provision within it." He opened his folder. He said that in the course of establishing the Voss family trust, Edmund Voss had included a spousal continuation clause, standard in structure, but specific in its terms. He said the clause had been reviewed and co-signed by all trustees at the time of the trust's original formation. He said he would now read the operative section. He read it. The language was precise and unadorned, the way legal language was when a careful man had written it with the intention of being clearly understood rather than impressively complicated. The clause stated that the spouse of any male Voss heir, upon marriage, became a co-beneficiary of the trust's income provisions for the duration of the marriage. It stated that any action by a trust signatory to materially exclude, diminish, or publicly disadvantage the standing of a qualifying spouse within the family structure constituted grounds for a review of that signatory's own trust distributions. It stated the date of original formation. It stated the names of the original signatories. Delia Voss's name was second on the list. Mr. Aldrich looked up from the document and said, "Mrs. Voss, you were a signatory to this instrument at its formation 31 years ago. Your signature appears on page 4. He did not need to produce the page. He had his copy open in front of him, and he simply turned it to face her across the table. Delia looked at the page. The room was very quiet. The window at the far end let in the gray March light, flat and even, and the heating system ran its low background note through the vent above the door, and nobody spoke. I reached into my bag. I took out the envelope from Wren and Aldrich, the one that had arrived 6 weeks ago, the one I had carried in the flat interior pocket and placed in the fireproof box and touched once in the dark of the closet without opening. I set it on the table in front of me, seal side up, the law firm's return address visible. Then I opened it. I did it carefully, along the seal, the way my father had opened anything that mattered, without tearing, without rushing, with the deliberateness of someone who understood that how you handled a document said something about how you understood its value. Inside was a single folded page and, clipped to it, a smaller envelope I had not known was there until this moment, which bore my name in Edmund's handwriting. I set the smaller envelope aside. I unfolded the page. It was a copy of the same instrument Mr. Aldrich had just read, the spousal continuation clause, the operative section, the date of formation, the list of signatories. At the bottom, in a section I had not heard Mr. Aldrich read because it had been added in an amendment dated 18 months ago, there was a paragraph that addressed the trigger condition directly. I read it aloud. My voice was level. I held it level the way I had held it level on the phone with Delia 6 weeks ago, the way I had held it level in her living room, the way I had held it through all of it, not because I was performing composure but because I was composed and had been, and the composure was not a wall against anything but simply the accurate expression of a person who had been waiting for the right moment and had arrived in it. The paragraph stated that in the event of a qualifying exclusionary action against a co-beneficiary spouse, defined with 3 specific examples, the second of which described the removal of a co-beneficiary's name from a family event's guest list or invitation, the acting trustee's distribution from the trust would be suspended pending a review period of no less than 90 days. I set the page flat on the table. I did not push it across to Delia. I did not need to. She had heard every word. I said, "Edmund added that amendment 14 months ago, after he mentioned Wren and Aldrich to me, before he died." Delia looked at the page in front of her, and then at the page in front of me, and then at her own hands, which were folded on the table with the precision she brought to everything and which were, I noticed, very still in the way of hands that have been deliberately instructed to remain so. Cornelia said, "This seems like something that could be discussed." Mr. Aldrich said, "The instrument is not discussable. It's operative." Cornelia stopped. Delia said nothing. Caleb, beside me, had the quality of a man who had arrived at a destination without fully understanding the route and was now oriented for the first time, looking at the landmarks and placing himself inside the map. I picked up Edmund's personal envelope from where I had set it beside my bag. I did not open it at the table. I held it in both hands for a moment. The weight of it, the specific slightly yielding quality of a paper envelope that has been sealed by hand, his handwriting on the front, my name in the deliberate, careful script of a man who had learned to write as though writing were a form of respect. I put it back in my bag. Delia looked at me across the table. She did not apologize. I had not expected her to. Not here. Not in front of Mr. Aldrich and his colleague and the flat gray window and the legal record of everything that had just occurred. That was not who she was, and it was not what this room was for. What she did was look at me with an expression I had not seen on her before, which was the expression of a woman who had spent 31 years being the architect of her family's arrangements and had arrived at a moment where an arrangement had been built around her, quietly, by someone she had underestimated, over a period of years she had not been paying attention to. I held her gaze for a moment. Then I looked at Mr. Aldrich and said, "What do we need to sign today?" He said, "Only an acknowledgement of notification."
"Which you've already signed."
"The review period begins automatically." I said, "Thank you." He said, "Edmund would be pleased." I said, "I know." We walked out of the building into the March afternoon, Caleb and I, and the air was cold and the sky had broken slightly from the flat white of the morning into something with more definition, actual clouds with actual edges, light coming through in places. The street was ordinary. A delivery van was double parked at the corner. Two women passed with a stroller moving fast, heads down against the cold. Caleb stood on the sidewalk with his hands in his coat pockets and looked at the street and then at me. He said, "He did all of that."
"He did," I said.
He never said anything to me. I thought about Edmund in the garden at the gate 2 years ago. "You're going to be all right here, Serena. I've made sure of it." He had said it to me, not to Caleb. He had understood something about the architecture of what was coming that Caleb, who was inside it and loved by it and also somewhat shaped by it, could not have seen from where he stood. "He said something to me," I said.
Caleb looked at me.
His face had the quality it had when he was trying to locate himself in a new understanding, working backward from where he had arrived to trace the route he hadn't known he was on. "I'm sorry," he said, "for the parts one could have stopped." I looked at him for a moment. The cold moved between us, and I felt it on my face and on my hands, which I had not gloved because I had not been thinking about gloves that morning, and the cold was clarifying in the way cold sometimes was. "I know you are," I said. "We'll talk about the parts you could have stopped." He nodded. He understood that we'll talk was not a dismissal. It was a ledger entry, noted and held, to be addressed in the correct sequence, the way all things worth addressing were. I reached into my bag and took out Edmund's envelope. I opened it there on the sidewalk, with the cold coming off the street and Caleb beside me and the ordinary Tuesday afternoon moving around us in all its indifference. Inside was a single card, the size of a note card, and on it Edmund had written 8 lines in the same deliberate hand. I will not reproduce all 8 lines here, but the last one was, "You are the one who kept things. Make sure they know it." I folded the card and put it back in its envelope and put the envelope in my bag, in the flat interior pocket where I kept things that mattered, and I closed the bag.
"Let's go home," I said.
My daughter was born on the 21st of March, at 6:14 in the morning, in the early light of the first day of spring. I was the one who had prepared the room she came home to, the sage green walls, the glider assembled on a Sunday afternoon, the soft curtains that moved slightly in the air from the heating vent and gave the room a quality of gentle motion, as though it were already breathing. She came home to a room that had been ready for her for weeks because I was the person who made rooms ready, and the rooms I made held. The shower happened, eventually. Not Delia's version, and not the version I had originally planned. It happened 6 weeks after the birth, when my daughter was real and present and no longer a set of decisions being made by people who claimed to love her without yet knowing her.
My mother organized it.
My sister drove 4 hours to help. 3 of Caleb's cousins came, including Marcus, who arrived with a gift that was too large and completely right. It was small and warm and belonged to no one's vision of what the Voss family did except the people who were actually in the room. Delia's attended. She sat in the corner nearest the window and held my daughter for 12 minutes, and during those 12 minutes her face had an expression I had not seen before and could not have predicted. Something stripped of architecture, present without performance, the expression of a woman who had arrived at a new understanding through a route she had not chosen. She did not apologize at the shower, either. She sent a card 2 weeks later. It was brief, and it was not entirely adequate, and it was more than I had expected. Caleb and I had the conversations we needed to have, over a series of evenings in March and April, in the kitchen after the baby was asleep, with tea that we actually drank. They were not easy conversations and they were not finished conversations, but they were honest ones, which was the condition I had required, and Caleb met the condition, which was the thing that mattered. The trust review concluded. The outcome is a matter I keep in the flat interior pocket where I keep things that belong to me. What I know, on the other side of everything that happened, is this. Edmund had watched his family for 68 years and had understood something that none of the rest of them had bothered to understand about me. That I was not a temporary addition to be managed, not a variable to be arranged around the existing structure, not a name to be included or excluded according to whoever held the pen that week. I was the one who kept things. I was the one who covered the gap and built the room and paid the deposit and drove 4 hours when it mattered and maintained the spreadsheet and read the legal documents before signing them and held the envelope for 6 weeks without opening it because I understood that some things had to be opened in front of the right people at the right moment or they meant nothing. Edmund had known all of that. He had made sure the record reflected it. He had said, "Make sure they know it.
They know it now."
If you have ever been the one who kept things, who held the record, covered the gap, prepared the room, and still found your name removed from the invitation, hear this. The people who truly see you find ways to say so, even from the other side of everything. Build carefully. Hold what matters. Wait for the right moment. It will come. Share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Thank you for being here. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. What you build in quiet is the hardest thing to take.